Welcome back. Time now for the France 24 debate. Now, thousands of civilians have been killed and millions of others have been displaced since the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February. Well, having failed to capture Kyiv in the early weeks of the war, Moscow has been focusing military efforts on crushing resistance in Ukraine's south and east. And towns in the east of the country are currently facing intense Russian bombardment. Meanwhile, in the devastated port city of Mariupol, efforts to evacuate more civilians are underway as we speak, although hundreds of people are thought to be stuck in the city's last stronghold, that is the Azovstal steelworks. France 24's Sinead McCausland filed this report for us.
In Zaporizhia, residents from Mariupol arrive at the city's registration centre. They risked their lives to get to relative safety in their own cars, after spending the last 2 months sheltered in their own basements. They're some of the few people in Mariupol who are not holed up in the Azovstal steel plant.
It was really bad. We have no house. We have no city.
We lived in our basement since February 27th. We didn't leave because our house is close to Azovstal. The whole time we were shelled with mines, and then the airstrike started. Our house is completely destroyed.
Sunday, the International Red Cross and the United Nations helped evacuate residents who spent weeks sheltering in what was once Europe's largest steelworks factory. The buses were seen in a southern Ukrainian village Monday, 30 kilometers east from Mariupol. On board, some of the first citizens to be evacuated from the steel complex.
There's probably nothing left. There were bombings every day. All of the time we spent in the bunker, they were bombing.
Ukrainian authorities are still waiting for their arrival in Zaporizhia. Around 450,000 people lived in the besieged port city before Russia's invasion. Now the number's expected to be closer to 100,000. Before the evacuations began, some 1,000 civilians were expected to be sheltering in the sprawling Soviet-era steel plant.
Well, 1 week today, on the 9th of May, the annual Victory Parade is held. That commemorates the 1945 surrender of Nazi Germany, and it's held in Moscow's Red Square. Now, ahead of Victory Day, there's been endless speculation about what victories or trophies Russia might be hoping to announce from what it continues to call its special operation in Ukraine. So how are both sides faring in this conflict? Would the Kremlin consider complete control of the Donbass to be an acceptable minimum by way of a victory to end the Russian invasion? And what outcome would Ukraine and the West be prepared to accept in order to stop the war? Those are some of the questions I'll be putting to our panel today. Well, I'm joined here in the studio by Samantha de Benden, who is an associate fellow with Chatham House. And Samantha, you had a former role with NATO. Just tell us briefly what it was.
Yes, I was a civilian officer working in the political affairs section at NATO headquarters in Brussels, and my job was to oversee NATO-Ukraine relations.
Okay, well, great to have you with us. Very nice of you to come and see us. I'm also here in the studio with General Jean-Paul Paloméros, who's a former Air Force Chief of Staff and former Supreme Commander of NATO Allied Forces, so another person with a former NATO hat on. Thank you very much indeed for coming to see us, General. From Kyiv, we're joined by, well, close to Kyiv, we're joined by Peter Zalmayev, who's a director of the Eurasian Democracy Initiative. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. And lastly, from Moscow, we're joined by Alexandra Filipenko, who's a senior research fellow at the Institute for US and Canadian Studies at the Russian Academy of Sciences. Thank you very much indeed to all of our panel for joining us. Could I start in Ukraine with Peter? Because, Peter, I'd like to ask for your assessment on where things stand on the ground. Russia's strategy at the moment seems to be trying to link up the Russian-held territory in the west and the east of the country. What successes is Russia having, if any?
Well, first of all, I am actually finally in Kyiv, in my apartment, smack in the center of Kyiv. And a few days ago when I arrived, this was the day when the rockets slammed into buildings here in Kyiv, just after the Secretary General of the United Nations had left after his visit, which is telling, and I think it partly answers your question. Russia continues to be, bedeviled by a whole host of logistical and morale-related problems. The troops from the very beginning of this war, which Russia refuses to call a war, but calls a special operation. From the beginning, the Russian soldiers have never been properly told what they're going to Ukraine for. A lot of them apparently didn't even know they were being sent to Ukraine. And that tells you everything you need to know. Instead, what we're seeing is Vladimir Putin continues to hope that his campaign of terror against civilians, shellings of cities, trying to disrupt our infrastructure, trying to hit oil depots and transportation hubs, that will do the trick. And Ukrainians will crawl back to Vladimir Putin and beg him for some sort of peace talks where they would offer him the concession that he needs. He's not having a military victory in the east of Ukraine. He's having troubles in the south, and that is a big question. What is he going to present to his subjects on May 9th during the parade? That is a big question.
Indeed, and we'll be getting on to that. That's very much going to be a focus of our debate today. Samantha, let me ask you, we hear a lot about Russia's pincer movement. This is its strategy to seize the whole of the Donbass region. What does that mean, and is it working?
Well, it actually means to try and completely encircle the Ukrainian troops and make it difficult for them to be able to get any more supplies and to cut them off from the rest of the country. And it'll be then they will be surrounded on all sides. For now, the Russians are making advances, but they're making slow advances. You have to understand that this part of Ukraine has been invested by the Ukrainians for the last 8 years. This was the stronghold of their defense against Russia and Russian-held territories in eastern Ukraine. One has talked a lot about the town of Kramatorsk, which has come sadly under a lot of attack recently. That was the headquarters of the Ukrainian Army's eastern defense contingent. So it's a part of the country that the Ukrainians know very well. However, in the territories that Russia has taken, there's a town called Kherson, which many people are talking about, the town of Mariupol. In these towns, Russians are consolidating their presence in the sense that they are introducing rubles. They are promising pensioners there May Day 10,000 ruble payments on May Day. They've introduced the Russian mobile network. So these are territories which the Russians are now very, very quickly Russifying. So this points to the fact that they will not be leaving soon. Okay, or at least don't want to leave soon.
Yeah, and as you've been speaking, we've been looking at a map there that sort of really shows what the lay of the land is in Ukraine. Perhaps we can just put that map back up again, and you can see there in red what is now currently under Russian control. Let me turn to you, General Palomeros. What tactics are being used by the Russians there? Are they depending more on bombardment, or is it sort of more? Are they also engaging in sort of closer range tactics as well?
Well, they are using hugely deep strike type of capabilities with artillery, with their aviation. So and then they try to focus, but it's more a tactic of opportunity than anything else. From what we see, they have not managed to coordinate the efforts. Fortunately for the Ukrainians at the end of the day. And so it's not a very well done and well organized campaign. But if you want to achieve some success in a military campaign, you need three things at the end of the day. You need a good strategy. The strategy was not there, and it's not very clear neither now. Secondly, it needs the capabilities, which means as well the capability to sustain the effort. And we see that there are a lot of logistic problems behind that. And then the morale, obviously, the morale of the troops. So neither the one or the other is there today. This is why it's so difficult. It's so minimum gaining, I would say. But the fact that you stress is that they are capitalizing on what they take, which means a lot. Means that they are there to stay, and they have selected their places. And the South, we knew that the South would be a strategic objective. And the more we go, the more we see how much it is a strategic objective. And the blockade they made as well in the Black Sea, that's something they are starving in a certain way, Ukraine, in energy, food, economy, industry. So the long term is really worrying on that field. The big economic question and Mr. Zelensky just stressed that today or yesterday, saying, well, we will not be able to export our gold, I mean the wheat, and therefore what will happen to Ukraine. So it's not only a military campaign, it's a global campaign, and I would say that all the aspects are really worrying, and perhaps more the economic than the military. The Ukrainians are really doing a great job. They are getting good weapons from the West. They are able to use them as best as they can. So I think they are in a kind of stalemate in many domains. They are really resisting. But in economic terms, that's, for me, it's another question.
Yeah, it's alarming for the medium and longer term. Just lastly, Alexandra, let's turn to you in Moscow. I'd like to know from where you sit. I mean, how much is this conflict being talked about on the airwaves in Russia? Does it dominate discussion, or the fact that it's not going particularly well for the Russians, does that mean that it's perhaps not, headline news at the moment?
Oh, it's absolutely headline news, but it's headline news in this Orwellian world that we have to call what is happening, the tragedy that is happening. And I cannot even pronounce the W word because I'm in Moscow, but I have to call it a special military operation. But this special military operation is headline news on state TV. And also adding to what's already been said, on the occupied territories, Kremlin is introducing not only mobile networks and Russian rubles, but what I believe is more important, state Russian television. And state Russian TV is what mainly produces all the news. But in Russia, that's the only source of news, the only official source of news. The only way I can get any kind of news is through VPN. And of course, not a lot of Russians have VPN. Moreover, there are basically not that many Russian-speaking news channels on YouTube or, let's say, in the outside world that Russians can rely on, because all media, all opposition media had been canceled and had been closed during the past, let's say, few years, but in the past 2 months, there's been a shutdown and crackdown on Russian media. So Russian propaganda state TV is talking about what is going on, but they are looking at it from an absolutely different perspective. Since the backbone of this special military operation was this fantastic denazification of Ukraine, and no one still can understand what that means. Well, I mean, those propaganda, the propaganda machine is trying to explain it to the Russian people, but still, no one can actually understand what it means. But this fantastic denazification of Ukraine is definitely going to be presented as a winning strategy, and I believe that on May 9th, that's a very important holiday for Russian government, for the Kremlin. They've been focused and they've been really fixated on the Second World War and on the victory in the Second World War. So I believe that on May 9th, we might hear the words from Russian president's mouth, the words of victorious words, that Russia gained something or freed Ukrainian cities and denazified part of Ukraine.
Yeah, and I want to ask you, Peter, and pick up on some of what we've been saying here about what's happening in your country. I mean, these towns and cities that are now under Russian occupation, what do you hear about them from your contacts? What's said about them on the airwaves? What's life like there? Because we've heard about what Russia has left behind it in places where it's occupied, at places like Bucha, and we've heard horrific things. Is that consistent everywhere, or what sort of things are you hearing?
I am hearing indeed that something very similar to Bucha has happened elsewhere in Ukraine, but on a larger scale. When we talk about, obviously, Mariupol, what I am particularly concerned about, along with my comrades, is that we may never know the scale of the disaster there, simply because Russians are now, having learned this the lesson of Bucha. They are trying to get rid of the evidence, not only in Mariupol, but in other such places of tragedy. In Mariupol, we are hearing mass graves being dug in a very kind of hasty manner. We are hearing about portable incinerators that are burning corpses. The mayor of Mariupol has said that there may be tens of thousands of civilian casualties in Mariupol. But once again, when will we know the exact number? We don't know. What's happening there is it's a tremendous tragedy. Obviously, elsewhere in the Kherson region, for example, which is being, as we speak, transferred to the ruble system now of payment, since the army retreated pretty quickly. The city has remained essentially intact, but the residents have continued to put up resistance. They're coming out with Ukrainian flags on the streets, and they're being hounded for it. Some of them have been kidnapped and tortured, from what we understand. But their valiant efforts to defend their country, their identity, have caused the Russians to scrap the plan for now of a referendum. And let me just wrap up and finish what I didn't say in my answering your first question to me, since we're talking about Kherson and we're talking about the coming date, May 9th. Kherson area, actually, and the areas of Donbass, if Putin succeeds in trying to restoring them to their previous, borders, meaning the full administrative borders, which is a big if. He may just go ahead and announce that they are part of the Russian Federation through some kind of a referendum eventually. If that happens, then all of a sudden Ukrainians, by putting up their fight in those areas, will be going to war against Russia itself, and that could lead to a nuclear ultimatum for Vladimir Putin. Among other things, this is something we may hear on May 9th during the parade, along with possibly, as the British high-level officials have said, we may hear the announcement of a general mobilization. So these are just some of the things to consider.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely be talking more about those various scenarios for May the 9th. And just listening to what was being said there, Samantha, I mean, it's one thing to be introducing the ruble in Kherson and to be introducing Russian broadcast media in other parts of the country, as we heard from our guest in Moscow. But with a place like Mariupol, when you look at the scenes on the screens of total destruction, what would Russia even do with a place like that, which is now probably several years, if not decades, worth of reconstruction operation?
Well, it has the port. And even if the port is no longer functioning, it's a symbolic gain. It has taken Mariupol away from the Ukrainians, so that will have weakened the Ukrainian state and definitely weakened the Ukrainian economy. And General Palomeros made a very interesting point then about the economy and about the export of wheat. That is important because right now, the West is having to manage its relations with what I would call the global South, North Africa, the Middle East, who are already beginning to feel the effect of this war because they're not getting a lot of their wheat. They import most of their wheat from Ukraine. They're getting hungry and they're saying to the West, why are you fighting this war which is going to create famine for us? They cannot understand why Europe, why the United States is supporting Ukraine in this war, because all they can see is that it is creating hunger for them. And unless we can reach out to the global South in some kind of, I mean, I hate to say the word, but, really intensive PR venture to explain to them what this war is about, Russia is going to succeed in not only making sure they remain neutral, but in turning them against us. And this is where there's a really big threat that our leaders really need to be thinking about right now.
Yeah, and it's not a new threat, is it? I mean, the trolls online have been working hard these last 10 years or so, and they're working overtime right now.
Well, the trolls have actually just been given new instructions over the last few days to attack Western outfits that are actively working against Russia, including the organization I work for myself, and the United Kingdom and France and the United States have been picked out in particular.
Yeah, well, they certainly have some success, because I can tell you I've heard some pretty alarming dinner party conversation in the last couple of weeks as well. I mean, stuff that I didn't expect people to say. In terms of support from the West, have we done what are we doing what we should have done? Have we stepped up to the plate as a group, the West, have we done what you think
I
we deserve?
hope. I'm not certain, but I hope. There are good signs, but the question is still there. The jury is still out to see if those weapons are getting in the good hands where they need to be. But yes, the huge effort from the US is absolutely amazing and indispensable. As far as the Europeans are concerned, slightly less optimistic, enthusiastic, I would say. Well, a lot of countries are doing their best. Warsaw Pact countries some are very courageous. I mean, Slovakia, they are really doing whatever they can to support. I'm a little bit concerned about the division of EU countries regarding energy. That's a very bad sign which is given to the Ukrainian, because if we are not able to support the weight of the energy cost, this is not a sign of support to the Ukrainian fight. And last but not least, I think that our friends in Kyiv was really right, saying that Putin is raising the bar. Speaking of Lavrov, the Third World War, the nuclear options, the big strategic missiles, is preparing the ground to have this kind of rhetoric about the vital interest of Mother Russia. This is what he will say, from my perspective, on the 9th of May, saying, well, we are restoring a kind of big Mother Russia, and now everybody who try to regain that will be considered as a real enemy, and will be suggested to a retaliation, and including the nuclear retaliations. I fully agree with that vision.
Well, one interesting thing we're also seeing is a reintroduction of the Soviet flag and Soviet symbols. So this is being introduced in Russia. It's also being introduced in the occupied parts of Ukraine. And I can only imagine that this is an appeal to people's nostalgia. A lot of people are nostalgic for the Soviet Union. I mean, a lot of older people, some of the younger generation who never knew the USSR, are being brought up on stories of their grandparents about how wonderful everything was before the USSR collapsed. So there's this nostalgia being brought back in. And when you see the red flag on top of a tank in 2022, accompanied by armed formations, this was on the 1st of May, a May Day parade in St. Petersburg, of women dressed in black uniforms with red and white armbands with black numbers in the middle. Now, when you put red, white and black together, it brings quite a few shivers, make quite a few shivers go down my spine. And I wasn't alive when those colours were flying over a lot of Europe. So there's a very bizarre amalgamation of all the worst parts of our history, which seem to be coming together in the symbols that are being used in this war, as well as the actual horrors that we're seeing on the ground.
Yeah, I'd love to hear, actually, speaking about that, what Alexandre in Moscow makes of this use of symbolism, because it's not something I'd heard very much about, in fact.
Well, I'd also like to point out that there is this dichotomy of seeing Elon Musk and Angelina Jolie on one side, and Lenin's statues being again placed in Ukrainian cities, and the red flag on the other side. So it's obvious that we see the battle between future and the past. So yes, of course, those symbols have been very important for the Kremlin and for President Putin. And numerous times he said that the collapse of the Soviet Union is the greatest geopolitical tragedy of the 20th century. Not the Holocaust, not the Great War, not the Second World War, but the collapse of the Soviet Union being the greatest tragedy of the 20th century. So that's his sentiment, that's his resentiment, let's put it this way. And he really believes that his mission probably, I'm saying as if I know, but it seems, since I'm in Moscow and I follow the news, of course, it seems that he sees his mission as restoring, as it's been said, the great Russia, Mother Russia, and adding to new territories to Russia. And although it might seem maybe strange from the outside, but we should remember that he's been in power for more than 22 years now, since 1990. 1999. He's been prime minister. And so the person who's in power for so long probably has his own idea of his legacy and of what he wants to leave behind. And this resentment of Soviet Union being the great place for him particularly, because he made a good career in the Soviet Union, and in 1990s when everything collapsed, he had to go and work for some business people, while during the Soviet times, he himself has been an important person. So this resentment is extremely important for him, of course, and all those symbols, and even the fact that there is still a celebration of Victory Day, not a day of remembering and thinking about lives lost, but the day of celebration of May 9th. On the Red Square, so many years after the war it's been over. This says a lot about Russian leadership and the Kremlin. So of course all those symbols are very important, and introducing the red flag and Lenin's statues, that's something that I have been surprised to see in the occupied territories.
Okay, thanks for that. And just to rewind a little bit and talking about international support for Ukraine, which we were mentioning just before we move on to the subject of those symbols, which were extremely interesting to find out about, actually. I wasn't aware. But during the course of the weekend, the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, led a congressional delegation to Kyiv, where she met President Zelensky. And she said there that U.S. support for Ukraine will continue until, and I quote, the fight is done. Let's listen to what both Pelosi and Zelensky had to say.
We believe that we are visiting you to say thank you for your fight for freedom, that we are on a frontier of freedom, and that your fight is a fight for everyone. And so our commitment is to be there for you until the fight is done.
Ціную я як президент, наша команда і народ України. Це говорить про те, що Сполучені Штати є сьогодні дійсно лідером потужної підтримки України в часи війни проти агресії Російської Федерації. І я за це хочу вам подякувати за те, що допомагаєте Україні захищати.
Okay, President Zelensky, and before that, Nancy Pelosi speaking in Kyiv. Let me turn to Peter in Kyiv and ask you, I mean, just picking up on this issue of international support for your country. I mean, are the Ukrainians feeling that after perhaps a slow start and also a realization that some of the weaponry they wanted, including air power, wasn't going to arrive, do people now feel that the United States is taking the leading role that it should be taking in supporting Ukraine?
Well, absolutely. There's a sense of elation, which is not to be confused with, declaring victory as a fait accompli. Obviously, there's a lot of work to be done, and we don't know what Putin will do next as he grows desperate. We are very much aware that, the worst may yet to come, not just for Ukraine, but for the entire world. But now that Joe Biden has put his foot down and has said that, $33 billion is being committed to Ukraine's help, the land lease for the first time since World War II is being enacted, the land lease law to help Ukraine. This is very much in line of what Ukrainians expected, because if you look at the history of our countries, there's something to be said about how the West has enabled Western countries collectively have enabled Vladimir Putin to do what he has done by, first of all, feeding his war machine, selling him high-tech components to feed his war industry, buying gas and oil from Vladimir Putin, essentially forgiving him, the invasion of Georgia in 2008, and the former French President Sarkozy had a part to play in that. Then drawing the lines in Crimea, and then just sort of ignoring them, slapping very symbolic sanctions on Vladimir Putin, just sort of walking away. So, the West has swallowed a lot from this guy, and he has felt like, he can run sort of unimpeded in Ukraine. He can do everything. There's this sense of impunity that has been bred in him. So finally, I think the West has understood, the U.S. has understood it's time to put its foot down, time to stop Vladimir Putin. And my hope is that the shifting political winds in the U.S., especially in terms of the upcoming midterm elections, will not sway the establishment, and will not cause it to swerve from its course.
And Samantha, do you get the impression that the United States is united? The political landscape has been so divided the last 10 years in the United States that on this particular issue, do you get the impression that there is support on both sides of the aisle for example, that $33 billion of aid for Ukraine, which is far more than anyone had forecast?
I mean, I'm not a specialist in American politics, but I definitely get the impression that the US is united. I think there's a little bit of, should I say, surprise in certain European capitals at the scale of the aid, and perhaps concern amongst some Europeans that the Americans are taking the lead. Although, of course, I mean, somebody has to take the lead here. But I would really like to come back on what Peter said about the West allowing this to happen. Now, I'm British, and I've been working for many years on something called the London Laundromat, which is the fact that the City of London has been accepting dirty Russian money for decades, and we've been guzzling on Russian money. We've been allowing Russians to finance the Conservative Party. There is a parliamentary report on Russian interference in Brexit, upon which no action was taken until the invasion of Ukraine. We have former European leaders like French Prime Minister François Fillon on the board of directors of two Russian energy companies. We've got Matteo Renzi from Italy, who was on the board of an Italian railway company. We've got the former Austrian foreign minister on the board of Rosneft. Putin thought that he had bought us. He thought that we were too interested in our pockets, in our comfort, and in our money, and that he could act with impunity. After Russia turned off the gas in Ukraine in 2008 and 2009, Germany's response was to increase this dependence on Russian gas. We have allowed this to happen because we went soft, and Putin thought we had a soft underbelly that he could exploit, and that we would never react. He thought that we would allow Ukraine to just be taken, and I think he's absolutely flabbergasted by our reaction. And I'm, as a European, I'm British, I'm a very committed European Brit. I'm glad to see that finally our continent is, excuse the expression, is finally getting some balls. But we need more, because we need to take the lead now. And I think that Macron and Scholz need to do a joint trip together to Kyiv to show that Europe is here, so that the Europeans stop complaining that the Americans are taking the lead. We have to take the lead, or at least be side by side on the same level as them. We don't have the same amount of money, but we can bring psychological support to what is going on, to supporting Ukraine.
Do you think President Macron is likely to visit Kyiv anytime soon? He's due a visit, and he had a good excuse before, which is that he had an election to fight. But General Palomeros, do you think he's likely to jump on a plane anytime soon?
I hope.
Is it necessary? Is it important that he does?
Yes, it is. It is crucial. He's ahead of the European Union in a certain way. He's leading is chairing the EU today, and that will be a great sign now, because Europe has to make strategic decisions about giving weapons, the proper weapons, high-level, high-skilled, and train the people as well, and logistics, because without logistics you don't get any capability. So it's a long-term process. And secondly, we have this question about energy, we have this question of economy. So I think it is a time to take a very large political and strategic perspective on the present and the future. Because the future, as it was said, is very blurred in that sense that who will dare to support a Ukrainian effort to recapture in a certain way, to regain some grounds, which is their ground, nevertheless, that Putin is taking away from them. So it's now that Europe must, as it was said perfectly, must speak as one body, keeping its solidarity, solving this crucial energy question, and we can do that. I'm sure we can if we want, and then supporting really the Ukraine on the long term. We must be prepared, and that will be the toughest part of the equation, the long term. I mean, when the people start suffering the cost of energy, when they will see there will shortage in food and wheat and sort of things, there could be a sense of frustration as well in Western countries, and we are not used to that. So we have to take the pain of Ukrainians on our shoulders as well, and to show that we are ready to gain in resilience with them and for them. So it's a great time for Europe, and we mustn't miss the opportunity.
And I wonder if this Western solidarity behind Ukraine was perhaps behind what sounded a bit to me like the softening of rhetoric from the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. He gave a couple of clues at the weekend as to what Moscow would accept as conditions for peace. Let's listen to what he said.
We do not demand that Zelensky gives up. We demand that he gives the order to release all civilians and stop the resistance. Our goal does not include regime change in Ukraine. This is an American specialty. They're doing it all over the world. We only want to ensure the security of the people of eastern Ukraine, so that they are not threatened by militarization or Nazification of the country, and that no more threat to the security of the Russian Federation comes from the territory of Ukraine.
The Russian foreign minister speaking there. Let me ask you, Peter, were you surprised by what the foreign minister said? Does that sound to you like what he was saying at this time a month ago? Or does it sound to you like he's backpedaled a little bit?
Well, first of all, let me just say that nothing that comes out of Sergei Lavrov's mouth can be trusted. If you remember, he and his cronies leading up to the invasion before the February 24th were denying that they had any such plans. They accused the West of whipping up hysteria and lying against Russia, which they claimed had no intention to invade Ukraine. Then, 2 weeks into the invasion at the peace talks in Istanbul, Lavrov said, we never invaded Ukraine. I mean, 2 weeks into the invasion, he attempted to deny that reality, And you know what? A lot of his compatriots in Russia probably believe him. They live in this alternative kind of universe. So really nothing they say can be trusted. Right now, it's sort of a game they're playing. They're playing this nuclear kind of carrot and nuclear stick with the world. They are capturing civilians as hostages, such as in Mariupol, then releasing them, the Soviet-style kind of catch and release program to be seen as good do-gooders. And on the other hand, they're hinting that they may be backed into a corner and they will have no other recourse than to throw a nuclear bomb at us or to start World War III. So, I mean, this is what you're seeing. The reality does not change on the ground. Russians are still in denial about essentially having lost their war in Ukraine. I mean, I'm not trying to declare premature victory, but their declared goals of controlling all of Ukraine, that has failed. Vladimir Putin does not, seem to operate in the world that we operate in, and everything else sort of follows after him. The generals are acting as if they're still, hoping for victory, and the diplomats are talking, as if they're still, part of a civilized discourse. Everything now hinges on the will of one man in the Kremlin, who seems to have less and less, relation to reality.
Well, let's ask our colleague in Moscow. I mean, is there growing and audible opposition in Moscow to this so-called special operation? I'm assuming not, because I know how dangerous it is for people to speak out there in Russia. But are you getting any sense that perhaps people are getting fed up about being lied to?
Well, for now, I think that people still do not understand as of now. The prices are rising, but again, the state TV propaganda is saying that everything is fine, it's business as usual, it's just a special military operation somewhere, and things will get back to normal really soon. But among people that I know, I've seen a lot of people who escaped, who immigrated, who were afraid to protest, and those who protested were arrested, et cetera, et cetera. So there is no opposition right now, because there are all opposition leaders are either in prison or not in Russia. So there is no organized opposition as of now, and only some people still try to protest. And there is this hope for when prices rise that much, much that even propaganda, even the television cannot explain to Russians that things will get back to normal, there is this hope that the refrigerator will win over television, let's say. So people will finally understand and finally will realize that Russia is not only now not part of the civilized world and will not get the same products, will not get the products that Russians are used to, and but moreover, even those products that can be imported and that can be grown, they will be of a lower quality and that will cost much more. So there is this hope that this understanding will come soon, but not as of now, not yet, probably. So, and I'm sorry for allowing myself this, but could I add something to the point about the United States? Because since I'm from the Institute of US and Canadian Studies and my PhD is in the internal politics, I'm sorry for getting into, but I haven't heard the word bipartisan for years. I think since September 11th, bipartisan law, bipartisan, and when I haven't seen Senate or Congress basically voting unanimously or almost unanimously for years and years. I think for 20 years now, and now I see that much unity in the United States, and even just this little point I would like to make, if we compare the number of refugees that United States allowed in during the Syrian war, it was just 200, 300 people in a year. And now United States let in 100,000 Ukrainian refugees and hopefully more. And this is a great sign because actually we call US the nation of immigrants, and immigration politics of United States is a great mirror of general politics of the United States. So this allowing of that many Ukrainians, of course, when we say 10 million refugees, it's not that much, but for the United States, 100,000 is a great number. So I'm sorry, I just really wanted to
thanks for making that point. Thanks for making that point. Let's go back, just because we haven't got that much time left, to talking about what's going to happen a week today on May the 9th. Do you think, General, that the date, May the 9th, this victory parade, has somehow put a bit more pressure on the Russian army to somehow deliver? Do you think they're going to start operating at full throttle in the next 7 days just so they've got something to show their bosses in Moscow?
I don't feel they have been under pressure since the beginning, and we have seen that with the commanders, the generals who died on the battlefield, this sort of things here. So they have been under immense pressure. So I think 9th of May will be a parade, will show, but as I said before, I think that will be the time where Putin will raise the pride of the nation, the mother Russia, and this sort of things. A great Russian rhetoric about how the big battle that they have to win, and perhaps he will start speaking about war against the West, war against the enemies of the Russian democracy. I don't know, but that will be a time not so much of celebration, I would say, of glorification in a certain way of the Russian god, if I may say so.
And a lot of people think, in fact, General, that escalation is Putin's only option at that event. Would you say escalation, talk of World War III, is that something you might expect from Putin?
Well, he's actually said that he's not inviting any world leaders at today's May Day parade, which we've had we've had European world leaders in Moscow on May Day before, because it's also celebrating all of Europe's victory over Nazism. This year, he's saying we're not having any foreign leaders. He might have the Belarus president, Alexander Lukashenko, but it's debatable whether he's a foreign leader anymore. And he said this is not an anniversary year. It's a god jubilei. A jubilee is an anniversary. It's a celebration. There's nothing to celebrate this year. He's already announced there will be 2,000 less personnel on parade. There'll be certain categories of tanks which will not be there at all because they're being deployed in Ukraine. Quite a number of British officials, and this has been because they have also been looking at Russian sources who are thinking that there might be an announcement of either a partial or total mobilization. That means conscription. That means calling up young men of certain age categories. And interestingly enough, the Moscow Times, which is an English language Russian newspaper, which is pretty reliable, reported today that five call-up offices have been were burnt by arson in the last few days. So these are the offices that hold information on conscripts. Sabotage, Molotov cocktails. There are many reports of families sending their young sons abroad who were of conscriptable age. So there seems to be a general feeling, and I'd be very interested to see what Alexandra thinks of this, but a general sentiment that conscription might be about to be, general mobilization might be about to be called, and he will need that to have a victory in Ukraine, because he's running out of men. The problem is that even if you start conscripting people tomorrow, it will take a while before they can be deployed in the battlefield, unless he just does, the sort of World War II type of throwing, meat to the cannons, which is also a possibility, in which case we will see an absolute bloodshed. I've heard Russian radio stations that are now based in other countries talking about oceans of blood if we have general mobilization or partial mobilization. It will be really, really bloody. And this is what a lot of people predict might be announced on the 9th of May. And for that to happen, he will have to use the word war.
Okay. You've had the last word. I'm so sorry. I'm being told we've got no time left at all. Samantha de Bernard, thank you very much indeed to you. Thank you as well to General Jean-Paul Paloméros. Thank you to our friends in Kyiv, Peter Zalmayev, and thank you as well to Alexander Filipenko in Moscow. Thank you to all of you for being with us today. Thanks to you for watching. More news at the top of the hour here on France 24.